Okay, so today I'm doing a brake job on a 98 Chevy K1500 pickup here. It's the four-wheel drive model, but just doing the rotors and pads on the front side. I know they were getting pretty bad for me. They were squeaking real bad, and I was just putting it off. So I'm finally getting around to it. But looking here on the rotors, and you can probably even see that there's just a big ridge right on the edge there. They're worn down pretty good, and you can see that the wear patterns on there, at least on this side. I know the other side's got the rotor's actually got a wobble to it, so when I'm braking I can feel it as it goes around. It brakes harder in one spot and then kind of lets up, so that one's probably bad too. But to start with, after you get everything jacked up and the wheel off, there's two Allen wrench bolts on the back side here, so they're basically, you just got to take those two off. They're a 3/8 inch Allen, and if they were put in there properly with the whatever you call it, anti-seize or whatever you're using there, then they should come out not terribly difficult. So go ahead and get that taken off and start right there. Okay, so I got my two bolts out, and if you look at them here, this sleeve right around the bolt there, that's where you want to use that anti-seizing compound, or they actually make one specifically for brakes also. But you want to put that on this sleeve here so that when you go to take the bolt off, then this sleeve doesn't get stuck in there. I had one that was a little bit tighter than the other, but I was still able to get it out just with a little bit of wiggling back and forth, so it wasn't too bad for me, at least, probably because it was done right the last time actually. So okay, so I got my caliper off there. I actually ended up using a pry bar. It wasn't very tight, but the issue was the pads needed to come over top of the ridge that I had made on the rotor here, and the caliper has to come just straight off in line with these marks on here. It can only just go straight in, so it's got to come straight off, and so it's a little bit of a pain. So that's why I ended up using the pry bar, was just to get the pads over top of this ridge here. Once you get that off, these will just unclip on each side, and then the rotor, hopefully it's loose. I got lucky, and this one is, at least. We'll see on the other side. But the rotor will pop off, you can pop a new rotor on, and then the pads will come right off and slide those on. Okay, so I got the first pad off, just showing you how they're in there. There's a little bit of a dowel maybe there on the inside on each side, so the pad has to come away from the caliper before it can come up. And when it comes to taking your pad off, if you're going to replace it, it's fine to use a screwdriver to pry it off and pry these tabs out of the way. But when you're putting your new pad on, you want to avoid doing that, using a screwdriver to pry on it, so that you don't bend these tabs out of place. Otherwise, what you can do is the pad will be loose in there, and it could come shift or move how you don't want it to. So try not to use a screwdriver to pry on it when you're putting it back together. So when you put new pads on, obviously new pads or rotor, you're going to have a different clearances, because the pads are going to be thicker and the rotor will be thicker. So you need to push your pad back in. So I'm using just a C-clamp here, and using the old pad yet. And what I'm doing is, you can see up on top, I opened up the cap here so that in case I'm pushing too much fluid out, it has room to expand, so I'm not going to blow the cap off. But I'm basically just pushing the fluid back into the lines, and I'm basically just sucking this back in. So just very slowly tightening the clamp down and letting it push back and release the pressure and tighten the clamp a little bit. But that way I'm going to have enough clearance when I go to put my new pads on. And then all I got to do when I put once I get it all together, I'll have to pump the brakes once or twice, and they'll get pumped right back up, and it'll be good to go. Okay, and then on the inside pad, the way that that's held into place, you got these two little tabs here that they just kind of sit right inside here, just to kind of hold it from moving up and down. And then you get these two teeth, I guess you could call them, that sit down right in that groove right down there, so that it doesn't go back and forth. So that's how this one's held into place. You can basically just pull it straight out and you'll be able to pull that pad right off. Okay, so I'm putting the new pads on here, and I just wanted to point out that on the pads I got here, this tab, when I took off the old one, that tab was sitting on the back, and I went to just go throw a pad on, double checked it, and the tab was on the front side. So I went back to the box and then I found the other one. But there is, what I'm trying to say is there is a right and a left for these pads, just so that you get that tab in the right spot. And I guess I haven't really thought about that before, but I think what that tab is designed to do is that when your pad gets worn down enough, this tab will hit on your rotor, and what that's going to do is basically tell you that that's what makes your loud screeching noise when you're braking, that squealing, when your pads get worn down, that tab hits, it's going to make that noise for you. Okay, so I bought a new rotor, new in box, so just make sure that when you get this, you're going to notice it's got this grease on it, and you got to clean that off. What that is, it's just kind of a shipping grease. It prevents rust, so they put that on there so that you don't get a rusted rotor first time you open it. But you have to clean that off before you put it on, otherwise you're going to have grease on your brakes and they're not going to work. So make sure you just use some brake cleaner and clean that off real good, both sides, and just get all that shipping grease off of there so that you don't have an issue. Okay, so I'm putting everything back together now. I'm making sure I picked up this little packet here at O'Reilly's where I got the pads and rotors. It was like $1.30-some. But this is definitely worth the buy, so that next time when you're taking the rotors back off of the pads, these Allen bolts on the back, they can come off. So you put that on that sleeve on there for the caliper, and that way when you pull the Allen off, then that sleeve it'll come out actually instead of getting stuck in there. It's just kind of like an anti-seize for it. So go ahead, make the investment, spend that $1.30, and have a better day the next time you take your brakes apart. Another thing that I should mention is that if those Allen bolts are actually rusted out or rusted, or the threads are really tight, do yourself a favor and either use a tap or a die on the bolts and the holes, or just go ahead and buy the new bolts with sleeves on them. You'll thank yourself later, so that you don't have to, basically if those don't come out, if those threads are stripped in the Allen head, you're screwed, and you're basically going to use a torch to get that caliper off, and you're going to replace that too. So do yourself a favor and make sure that that's going to go in real easy and come out easy enough, so that way you don't have a problem. Okay, so I got the other side done now. When it comes to torquing these Allen bolts on the back side, there is a torque spec and you can look that up, but I don't know, I just put it pretty much just good and tight. I'm not going to worry about it. I don't think it's going to be an issue for me at all. So if you're worried about it, you can look up the torque spec and torque it down, but I just have a 3/8 Allen wrench. Otherwise I have a metric Allen socket set, and that doesn't quite fit up perfect, so I wasn't going to worry about that. Okay, so I just got everything put together and I'm just getting out into the truck now. So one thing I do want to point out is, since I pushed that pad all the way in, I had to, when I first put the brake on, I put my foot to the floor almost. It's loose, you got to pump it up. So once you get all that fluid pumped back up in there, it stops for me just fine. So I've been stopping, starting just to make sure everything's working for me. It seems good to go, so I'm just going to take it on a road test, I guess, and let her rip.